By working closely with clients, Lanco Group is able to meet the complex infrastructure requirements for residential, commercial and industrial developments on time, on budget. Find out more at lancogroup.com.au. Lanco Group, your business partner for engineering solutions.
Improve the financial heartbeat of your business. Increase profits, cash flow and manage your business better. Call DKP & Co. on 03 9023 9370.
Since 1998, Lanco Group has been providing superior civil engineering solutions and advice to developers, local government and service authorities across Australia. Lanco Group is known for delivering sustainable, efficient solutions. By working closely with clients, Lanco Group is able to meet the complex infrastructure requirements for residential, commercial and industrial developments on time, on budget. Find out more at lancogroup.com.au. Lanco Group, your business partner for engineering solutions.
Hello everybody and welcome to the NPL Victoria pod here on FNR Football Nation Radio. Nick and Lachie Flanagan. It's the off-season edition. I mean, there's no games to review.
It is.
Now,
I thought you referred to it as the show must go on edition.
Yeah, well, it is. It technically is. The show must go on. Obviously, we're into the
off-season
now,
it must go on because we want it to go on. Like, we're not ready to give up on the NPL Victoria just yet. But with good reason today, Nick.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll get straight into it today because we're joined by a very, very special guest. And we're joined here today on Zoom by the new head coach of Melbourne Knights, Ben Cahn, who's lended us some of his time to have a quick chat today. Ben, thank you for joining us.
No, pleasure to be with you, gents. Thank you for having me.
Well, Ben, I guess take us through it all. I mean, congratulations on landing the gig, but tell us a little bit about how it all came to be and what was behind, I guess, the decision-making to head down south.
Look, good question. Look, Pave and I have been in touch, for a long time. And I think, as he said, he's followed my career. I've followed Knight's trajectory. And look, I've been at Olympic for 5 years, and 5 years in football is a long time. And it was time for me to have a change personally. Thoroughly enjoyed my time and reflect on it very well. But it was, it was going to be difficult for me after a fifth grand final to get up and go again. So I was looking for a change. Ave and I had been in touch, and he flew up to Queensland, and I flew down there a couple of times, and here we are. So, look, it's a project. It's not lost on me, the challenge ahead of me. I know the size of the club, but I know it's underachieved in recent years, and I think part of the reason it really appealed to me was the chance to bring a club with such history back, to the top of Australian football.
It almost feels like, obviously, Knights are of a different stature, but to go back to your time at Olympic, they were a team that had missed out on finals, and you got them to, back up to the top. You got them into consecutive grand finals. Is that something that sort of excites you, the chance to not exactly replicate that, but, take those sort of similar steps? Does the fact that you know what it takes to bring a club back up to the top sort of help you to jump into a role like this?
Absolutely. I think there's quite a lot of similarities between the two jobs. I think that for me, I like to work with connection to clubs that have passion and have people that believe in the club and that care about the club. And you can tell when you go there, it's not just the people in the stands, but it's the people working behind the scenes care immensely about the club. And Olympics the same. I don't know how much of the 5 years you were able to see, but we had an amazing community support, and Knights having been around that sort of mid-table side for a few years, it would be it really excites me, and it'd be really special to pack Summer Street again and have people that care about the club seeing Knights competing at the top.
Hey, and I mean, how big of a job is it in terms of getting Knights back up to, their former glory? Obviously, the last, 6, 7, 8 years, they've really struggled. I mean, they haven't played finals in quite some time. It's a very competitive NPL Victoria. I mean, with your chats with Pave, your chats with, I guess, the other technical staff, how big is this job? Do you feel like that they're a few players away from, potentially competing again? Are you confident with the squad that I guess is already there? What are you looking to impart, I guess, once you get started in a few weeks or whenever that might be?
I think the current squad's stronger than it's given credit for. I think there are some very, very, very good footballers in there. I think it's not a secret that it needs, probably 3 or 4 top players to come in and help bring the team back in line with some of the clubs that have done really well in recent years. How tough is the job? I'll let you know in a year.
Yeah. Well, Ben, I haven't watched every single game of that 5-season stretch you're referring to, but because of work, I have watched a fair bit of this season and the football that you've played. And across the stretch, your Olympic side has played a really attractive, possessive brand of football that I know a lot of people have been waxing lyrical about inside Queensland, outside of Queensland. Is that a style that you plan to carry into this job at Knights? Because it's possibly a style that traditionally Knights haven't been as familiar with playing. Is that something you want to bring in a sort of new age for the Melbourne Knights?
Absolutely. I think that, while, part of the appeal is, of Melbourne Knights is their history and what you associate with Melbourne Knights in the past. But I think it's important to everybody involved with the club to take the club forward and into the future now and create a new chapter and create, Melbourne Knights of the future. So it's how we play is absolutely, means a lot to me. I don't think it's really in me to play in any other way. I've spent so long working towards playing this way. Having said that, the league is physical and it's a lot more direct, and it's going to be part of my job to make sure that I can adapt and make sure that the team's intelligent enough and we recruit well enough that we can deal with teams that want to play in a different way. And I think having been in Queensland, and especially this year more than any other, the pitches have been really poor. With the flooding we had, really none of the playing surfaces have recovered. So being able to adapt and find our way, find what works to play the way we want to play, but make sure we compete in the league is really important.
You sort of touched on it a little bit there when referring to the NPL Victoria, but as we know, the path from Queensland down south to the NPL Vic is a path that's fairly well trodden. I'm curious to know, or have you expand a little bit more on how you view the league and the style of the league, because I remember speaking to the then Brisbane City head coach in Matt Smith about the comparisons, and he said that he saw NPL Queensland as maybe being a bit more technical, while sort of, as you said, Victoria was a bit more physical, a bit more transitionally reliant. I mean, how do you see them comparing and contrasting, and how will that factor into the job you're going to do here?
I think NPL Victoria is a slightly older league. I think if you go and look at the average ages across the squads, I think there's probably an extra 3 or 4 years in the Victorian clubs. I think Queensland, especially recent couple of years, has been quite a young comp. I don't know if I'd say if it's technically better or not. I think a lot of Queensland's technically best players are playing in Victoria. But I do think that there's a different maturity to the league in Victoria and a different physicality and competitiveness. And there's certainly teams that that can mix it up. And I think in Queensland the top teams are very, very strong. I think there is a drop off. I think in Victoria you've alluded to it already that there's probably 9-10 teams looking to make finals and compete at the top, and even the ones below that are strong and can get results against anybody.
In terms of, you mentioned the maturity and the competitiveness, I guess, of NPL Victoria. And we've seen, Lachie just spoke about the well-trodden path of a lot of players and yourself as a coach coming down from Queensland into Victoria.
Our coach of the year in Victoria as well. Of
course. And I mean, seeing, Queensland produce all this talent, but can't seem to retain them. And it seems like Victorians, are almost, the league is almost benefiting from all these players. Why do you think it is that NPL Queensland and these players don't want to stick around and they want to maybe try their luck in NPL Victoria? Do you think it's more the stake of the competition's quality? How do you, I guess, see that? Because, we saw Max Mikela, Henry Horde. There's so many others as well that have made that move.
Oh, look, I can't necessarily speak for other people, but I would say that the size of the clubs and I guess the stature of the clubs and how they're followed is still larger than it is in Queensland. The league in general is viewed as a step up, which is obviously a topic for debate, but I think it's a good progression for young players who do well in Queensland, and I mean the obvious answer is it's a little bit more lucrative going down to play in Melbourne as a young player, and that's I'm sure that plays a part. But look, for myself, it was a case of I wouldn't want to work necessarily in Queensland for any other club against Olympic, and I needed a change of scenery, new opponents, new coaches to coach against, a new group of players. But the major appeal for me is the size of the club and the size of the clubs that you play against.
Well, on the size of the club, I don't think it's a secret to anyone. Melbourne Knights' ambitions of being involved in a potential national second division, was that something? I can only imagine it was something that factored into your decision making with a role like this, even if your primary focus for now will be the NPL.
Look, I'm no different to everybody else in the country, where I desperately want the national second division to happen and believe it's necessary. I'm also no different to the rest of you, where I have no idea if it will happen, when it will happen, and if it happens, who will be in it and what it will look like. So I think, as you said, it's not a secret that Melbourne Knights are ambitious and certainly have their sights set on a national second division. And if that comes off, then that's fantastic. And that was certainly part of our discussions. But for now, we concentrate on the NPL.
Well, talking about the NPL, I guess for the Melbourne Knights fans listening, when are boots to the ground? When is everything getting sorted? Yourself, meeting the players, getting everyone in for pre-season. I guess what's the schedule from here into the start of the season next February?
So I've met with most of the current playing squad. We're well underway in terms of bringing in new recruits as well. And I'm moving down there first week of October, and we'll commence pre-season first week of November.
Wow. And in terms of players, that are staying, that might be coming in, you've mentioned that the work for that is already being done. Might we see a few more follow you down the path from the sunny areas of Queensland to Victoria?
You may.
I'm very interested to see who those end up being. And I did want to ask a few more questions about some of those players that have played with you or for you in Queensland. We've seen quite a few of them manage to, ink A-League deals off the back of the work they've done under you at Olympic. Keegan Jelacic, the most recent example, heading off to Perth Glory. Obviously, Knights haven't had so many of those players that have gone to that next level, have made the jump. We've seen Luka Kolic recently featured in that Joey's Talent ID camp. Is that something that is, while maybe not the main goal of your time here at Knights, a sort of secondary ambition to develop a few more players to the level where they can make a jump potentially into an A-League or a national second division as well?
Absolutely. I think it's something I enjoy massively as a coach is identifying players in the group that are hungry and ambitious and obviously young enough to still go on. And you mentioned Luka. Luka's one of them. But yeah, I'll give him and the other boys absolutely, all my energy and knowledge, and do everything we can to try and push as many on as we can to go and achieve their goals.
And a final one for you, Ben. Obviously, still plenty of pre-season left to go. A lot of time until you will be officially welcoming Melbourne Knights fans to Summer Street. I'm sure you're hoping that your brand of football and hopefully the success that comes with it will bring fans back in their droves. But what is your message to the Knights faithful as you head in the door?
Well, look, it's a big year for the club. It's the 70th anniversary. So regardless of whether I'm there or not, it's going to be a year of celebration to celebrate the history. But, for me coming in, I'm absolutely respectful of the history, and it's a big part of why I'm there. But let's move forward together and create the next chapter at Melbourne Knights and see where we can take the club into the future.
Well, Ben, good luck. I'm sure we'll chat to you again very soon, but thank you for coming on. A big job ahead of you, but we're looking forward to seeing, I guess, the progress of Knights. And I guess once you guys do roll out for that opening game in February, all eyes will be on Melbourne Knights, and looking forward to seeing what you can do. But again, thank you very much for jumping on board today.
Thanks very much, Jen. It's been a pleasure.
We'll take a quick break here on the...
Since 1998, Lanco Group has been providing superior civil engineering solutions and advice to developers in local government and service authorities across Australia. Superior civil engineering solutions and delivering sustainable, efficient solutions. By working closely with clients, Lanco Group is able to meet the complex infrastructure requirements for residential, commercial and industrial developments on time, on budget. Find out more at lancogroup.com.au. Lanco Group, your business partner for engineering solutions.
Improve the financial heartbeat of your business. Increase profits, cash flow and manage your business better. Call DKP & Co. on 03 9023 9370.
Long throw, goalkeeper's come, hasn't got there. Harry Kewell, and then poked home by Tim Cahill. Australia have done it! 6 minutes to go, and it's a landmark moment for Australian football. Tim Cahill has scored the nation's first ever World Cup Finals goal.
You're listening to FNR, Football Nation Radio.
Welcome back to the NPL Victoria pod here on FNR Football Nation Radio. Nick Dabano and Lachie Flanagan in studio today. Yes, the show must go on. We're going on into the off-season. Exciting times here in the studios. Obviously, it's the off-season, but doesn't mean that the NPL chatter goes anywhere. It's our version of trade radio, really.
Yeah, it kind of is. NPL Trade Radio. Let's not mention our competing radio stations products. I don't want to get into that area again. But yeah, we're coming off the back of a great chat with Ben Cahn as well. I think. Look, we haven't seen any of the football. It's only early days. He's not even here in Victoria yet, but based on the conversation we had with him, Nick, I think Melbourne Knights
are in good hands.
And his reputation coming here to Victoria in very good hands. I mean, he has had that experience of taking on, I guess, a project, so to speak, and bringing them back up to the top in the past with his brilliant work with Olympic, and not just in terms of the results, but the actual style and manner, like really swashbuckling football in which they got their results, I think is really, really interesting. And we got that interesting tidbit about the potential for some players to maybe follow Ben Cahn down to Queensland. And there has been some players from Olympic this season I've really watched. I wonder, I'd be fascinated to know, because attacking me, I'm trying to work out who it might be from who Knights are currently sort of lacking in their squad, and an attacking midfielder is chief amongst them. Takero Okada, from the games that I watched, had a really, really solid season. He played a brilliant game, albeit in a loss against Lions, and then there was another game against Gold Coast Knights, where again he was very good and scored on that day. Does he maybe fill that void? I mean, he has come down to Victoria. He didn't really have a great time with Heidelberg. He didn't exactly hit the ground running. I mean, one questions how much of that was to do with him and how much of it was to do with the club and the whole, pandemic thing as well. It's interesting. Olympic have got some good players. I'm fascinated to see who comes down with him. And maybe they're not from Olympic. Maybe they're from elsewhere.
Maybe. I mean, there's plenty of talent up in Queensland.
Yeah, but I think I
see it every time. The wild path.
I think Melbourne Knights have made themselves a point reviewing next season. And as we said to Ben off air, the games against the game against South Melbourne next year, if it wasn't already good enough, the contrast of styles, the historical rivalry between the two sides. Yeah, depending on how Knights go to start the season, how soon they see South Melbourne, the reigning premiers, that will be great.
It'll be great. And hopefully this is the season that Melbourne Knights can turn it around and get back into the top 6 of NPL Victoria, but also at a very crucial time right now in the National Second Division, hopefully just around the corner. Ben Cahn did speak about that. This is a big club. This is a team with aspirations to be part of the National Second Division, and hopefully, as we've said so many times, it's only just around the corner. Lachie, on the coaching front, we have been keeping an eye on sort of, the merry-go-round, quote-unquote, and of course, Altona sacking Savas Patikis a few weeks ago, but they have announced their new coach, and he's none other than
new
coach for, I think it's his third tenure at Altona. Yep, it's his fourth tenure at Altona. John Markovski, obviously a former Socceroo, a former coach of Fitzroy City, Springvale, Preston Lions, Falkner Blues, as well at Springvale for a bit. Coming back, was obviously there technically last year and coached 4 games, 3 draws and 1 loss, and then left and was replaced by Archie Davis, and Nick Kovacevic took over for the remainder of the interrupted 2021 season, and Savas Patikis took over at the start of last season, 2022. And now Markovski's come back for tenure number 4. What do we think?
It's an interesting one.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating one.
It's going back to the well, hey?
Yeah. I don't know. I feel far less enthusiastic about that coaching appointment than I mean, it's hard when you're comparing every, signing to Ben Cahn. But, I feel a lot more whelmed by this one.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Look, how much can a coach who has been there on 4 separate occasions really move the needle? And I do think that Altona, particularly on the back end of last season, identified themselves as a club who needs some needle moving. I don't know. I think the jury's very much out on this one. Look, Jonesy is someone who will have that sort of pulling power, I guess, and Altona are a side who, not being one of the Big 6, I guess, of NPL Victoria, not traditionally being a top
Big
6 team.
Big 8, Big 10. Yeah, the Big 10, yeah.
The Big 10. I used to love watching that show on Cartoon Network. Oh, no, it's Ben 10.
Jesus.
They, despite not being in that kind of inner sanctum, they have had a record of bringing in some pretty high-profile players over the years. I mean, they got James Exidius across from Bentley this season, Jamal Ali as well, Chris Oldfield before that. Like, they've brought in some players of decent caliber, and I'm sure that he'll only help with that. But yeah, as for the football that's played out in the park, who knows?
Yeah,
who knows? I don't know. I while not having any problem with him as a head coach necessarily, I just wonder what more can a coach do on his full stint.
Altona are in their fifth now straight season in the top flight. I mean, got promoted back in 2018 and never finished higher than 11th on the table. I think 11th where they finished 11th last season. So 11th in 2019, 11th again in 2022. And of course, in the 2 interrupted season, technically finishing last in the 5 games of 2020 and 12th in 2021, where Jonas Markovski was their top goal scorer with 4 goals that season as well. So it's going to be an intriguing off-season for Altona. We spoke about, the gap between the best and the worst in NPL right now, and themselves and St. Albans find themselves, and Hume. I mean, not even really Hume to an extent, because I think you can expect Hume to improve next season, but they find themselves in that weird sort of abyss where they're not necessarily... Not talking about Hume, we're talking about Altona. Altona kind of find themselves with St. Albans in that abyss of, are they good enough to take the next step?
Kind of like the nether zone, isn't it?
Yeah, they're probably good enough again to stay up, but are they good enough to push for finals? That's a whole nother question because, I mean, with North Geelong and Melbourne City coming up, you can expect they're probably going to be at around the same kind of level of Altona and St. Albans. They probably do need to be careful in terms of their stocks to, survive the drop. I think they have enough quality in that team.
Again,
but the big question for them, Lachie, is, of course, that John Markovski has to face this season is they do need to find someone who's going to be able to bang in the goals consistently this season, because their big problem was they could defend really well. So what you're saying
is they need him.
Yeah,
they need a younger version of
basically him. Clone him, but de-age him as well and put him in a time machine or something. Basically, if there's a way to somehow do that through the laws of physics and science. But it's going to be a curious watch to see what Altona do this off-season, and whether, they could really, there is still that possibility that, they could shock everyone and, go on a bit of a merry run and upset the apple cart. But considering how we can expect everyone else to improve dramatically and the best of the best to sort of maintain, if not get better, Altona need to sort of work out, all right, is now the time that we don't want to get left behind, or we kind of accept where we are and we're going to battle and try and stay up and solidify ourselves in this league. So very intriguing off-season to come.
Yeah, and while not necessarily cracking that top six, I do think that they could at least bolt away from, starting to teeter on the edge of like relegation chance, because unlike the other, not so much Hume, but St Albans, they've probably got a bit more spending power, and we have seen that over the last couple of seasons. Even if it's just one player, sometimes that can make the difference. So, yeah, John Markovski's in the door. What players are welcomed by his embrace into Paisley Park will be a curious thing to keep an eye out on.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's something to certainly, we'll sink our teeth into over the coming weeks when, transfers start to come through and the rest of it. Obviously, we're still awaiting news as to who the new Bentley Greens coach is going to be, who the new coach of St Albans is going to be, of course, as well in NPL 2 with Bulleen Lions. The other bit of news today, Gianfranco and Pellizzeri signing on for another year with Brunswick Juventus. So the Juve board backing in Gianfranco after coming so close to promotion, and by the grace of God, I think Brunswick Juventus will be hoping that next season they can be right up there again. Shout out to Joe Suller and his brilliant commentary for the final game.
There were some rumblings about that job that we'd picked up that would have been seismic in a Victorian footballing sense. Some of the names particularly taking an interest in that job. But that hasn't come to pass, and Gianfranco and Pellizzeri was a whisker away. He plays a brand of football, I think, that is effective in the NPL 2, and depending on what the strength of the sides are that do get promoted, we expect Preston and both of the other two academy sides to be strong. I guess the extent, the question remains is the extent to which they improve and are competitive.
And of course, remembering the teams that have come down in Eastern Lions and Dandy City as well, on the lookout for a new coach too. And of course, they confirmed that Steven Topalovic will depart at the end of this season. So curious to see where Topalovic ends up, because whoever can get him, especially in a top tier sense, gets a very, very, very handy centre back in their stocks. And he was very good when he came back from injury this season, and he kind of led the charge from the back in terms of trying to keep Dandy City in the top tier. So whoever can pick him up, you can kind of look at quite a few of the teams that either got promoted or teams that survived that could do with potentially some other centre backs. But when you look at Altona and St Albans, Lachie, they had two of the best defences in the league last season, but the problem was for them up top. So you're probably looking at maybe a Hume City, maybe potentially Melbourne Knights.
Well, I
see where he ends up.
I guess I wonder, does Topper want to, because he is a bit older.
Yeah, he's got a family now.
He's in the sort of mid-30s. Maybe this is the time where he wants to potentially take it a bit easier. Maybe not make that jump back into the top flight. I don't know. Watch this.
Well, if it's a southeast sort of area, if he wants to stay around that area, we don't want to sort of put words in his mouth, but that's sort of, if you, as you said, when you get to that age, travel is a big thing, and unfortunately,
saying you should head to Langwarrin. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, maybe. There's if he wants to stay sort of with more of the, there's Dandy.
Are you saying he should go to Dandenong Thunder?
Well, there's Langwarrin, there's Kingston, there's Oakleigh, there's Bentley. There's teams. It'd be interesting to keep an eye on. But anyways, Lachie, the one thing that we teased last week, and we're going to do this all through the off-season, is that, before really we get into pre-season stuff, is, of course, taking a look back at 2022 and having a look at each of the teams, put them under the microscope, and kind of look at what worked, what didn't work, their player of the season, memorable moments, what the burning question is heading into next season, and of course a grade for the year. So we're going to start off from top to bottom based on where the teams finished in NPL 1. Of course, this is the home and away regular season table, so we're not going to change it all up and look at the final table in terms of if you look at where they finish in the finals. But we will go through the top 4 teams today. We'll start off today with South Melbourne, Port Melbourne, Oakleigh and Green Gully. So, Lachie, let's get into it. Let's start off with the reigning premiers, the team who eventually were the runners-up on grand final day, South Melbourne. Back in the finals after a few years out in the wilderness, a successful season for them in terms of getting back into the finals, but ended on a real sour note, how they lost the grand final. But, sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, are we laying down the categories as well for where we...
I don't think you were listening, but as I was saying, let's start off the top. What worked for South Melbourne this year? What are some of the things we liked about South Melbourne this year?
Well, I mean, they finally reached I think the overwhelming positive is that they finally, from a sort of macro level, is that they finally returned to the level that, particularly in the early, days of the NPL, that South Melbourne had come to be known as a hegemonic, dominant, powerful force of this league, both on and off the field. And since the Chris Taylor era came to an end, he departed and ended up winding up at Oakleigh. More on that later, I guess. South Melbourne just haven't been that. They have underperformed year on year while burning through a variety of coaches who just haven't really ever worked out until they turned to a man with a continental pro license.
A man with a plan.
In Esteban Quintas. And let's be honest, Nick, 2021, his first season in full charge of actual, being able to play a season. More than 5 games at least. It wasn't amazing. South Melbourne had a solid start to the season. Harrison Sawyer suffered an injury. There was a bit of a peter out and then started through the sort of middle of the year before they started to pick up right at the end. But they were outside, outside the top 6. Yeah. I don't think you would have found many people, while given the strength of their off-season acquisitions into the door at Lakeside, the calibre of the players who came in. I mean, Jai Ingham was the one who caught the headlines, but he necessarily hasn't been the one who stood out over the course of the season. But Max Mikula certainly has been someone who's come in and done the job. Harvey Lopez, a signing that I think I would have questioned at the start of the year, the necessity of that swap deal. But, I mean, he was South Melbourne's Tony Mamaris medalist. He was clearly... in my view, I think one of their, if not their best players in the season. He was the goalkeeper of the year in the league. But even with all those acquisitions, there was still big question marks around the football, around the coach, and big questions about whether or not, even with those acquisitions, they would be guaranteed to finish in the top 3, let alone make the top 6. Certainly, I was a bit unsure about pessimistic, but unsure about the top 6 stuff. But they have absolutely smashed that. And every time there was, in the regular season at least, there was a hurdle thrown up, there was a moment at which, surely this run has to come to an end. This is gonna be the end of it. They put the runs on the board. Were they the most exciting team every single week? Were they must watch for every single fan who doesn't support South Melbourne? Not necessarily. But they put the runs on the board. They got the wins consistently. They got the wins they needed to. And they finally, by hook or by crook, made South Melbourne the team that their fans expect again. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a massive, massive win.
Well, the one thing is, I mean, it had been a dull... how many years was it? It was 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021 of 2 complete
Even with the interrupted season, it feels like a long time.
They were not playing well in those years. And I mean, just having a look at their record in the years before that, the first 4 years of the NPL, they finished first, third and second. And in 2015, 16 and 17, they lost the grand final in 2015, won it in 2016, lost on penalties in 2017, but then 10th in 2018, 8th in 2019, and they were 8th at the shutdown, only won 1 from 5 in 2020, and were 9th at the shutdown in 2021, with a really strange kind of, trying to think the points, the wins, draws, losses sort of was very even, like 6 wins, 7 draws, 5 losses, 19 goals, 18 conceded, 25 points on the board, but they were not playing anywhere near the level that they were this season.
That's the thing, is like the defense, the solidity of the defense was always there, but this year they've actually that was what they were lacking, as you've just identified. But this season they've scored the most goals in the league.
Absolutely,
the most goals in the league.
I mean, that was off the back of the work of guys like Harry Sawyer, Max Mikkola, Marcus Schroen as well, coming in. And, I mean, he's been there for so long, but coming in and hitting, scoring as well. Pat Langlar as well, got on the scoreboard quite a bit this season. Marko Jankovic from defence too. Alan Webb. And they had a great season, a great run all through the home and away season. But and really from a positive standpoint, I guess before Harry Sawyer left, they really looked like a team that, they were the team to beat. It just, as we go into the sort of segues into the next parties, and it may as well go into what didn't work. The main thing that didn't work was they did not have a plan B for when Harry Sawyer departed the team. We've spoken at length about this, about, their plan was always, the set pieces and the long throws and playing to Harry Sawyer's strengths and the sort of the gravity of Harry Sawyer in terms of how he was able to drag players, use his physicality, speed, to bring other players into the game. He was a one-of-a-kind striker in NPL Victoria, which, at the start, there were probably questions about how Harry Sawyer would work down here, but Esteban Quintas used him to a T. But the lack of a plan B when Harry Sawyer left got exposed a lot in those last few games of the season when they kind of, stumbled, did enough to win all those games, to get the points on the board. And then, of course, in the finals, they got completely worked out, especially in that grand final. Not so much against Green Gully, but mainly in that grand final when, they got torn to shreds. So from what didn't work, it's exactly that. They just did not have a plan B for Harry Sawyer. And I understand that when a player departs, you don't anticipate that at the start of the season. But coaches should always have that backup contingency plan just in case. All right, if Harry Sawyer gets injured, and considering he's so important and so integral to the way we play, what is the plan B? What can we do in this situation where, God forbid Harry Sawyer gets hurt or leaves the club? What can we do to ensure that, we don't completely fall to bits? And South, in some of those games, didn't really have it. And especially it got worked out in the grand final when as well they lost Andy Brennan, who didn't score at all this season in the league, but sort of his ability to, buzz around and bring other players into the game and work hard. It worked perfectly for South Melbourne. So we've spoken about going into next year about whether they can bring in another sort of, I was about to say like a key forward, because it's like Harry Sawyer is like a key forward in footy terms. Bring in someone who is, if they're going to keep playing that way, bring in someone who is of that physicality, of that stature, someone who can draw defenders, someone who's got such a big presence up top, because there aren't many that just sort of, they don't grow on trees, these sort of players who have, because a lot of those bigger guys, like they're very one-dimensional, but Harry Sawyer had so many different dimensions to his game. So it will be interesting to see whether they can replace it, but also replace 17 goals, I think it was at the end of the year that Sawyer had? 17 goals. As much as they scored 58, Lachie, that's a lot of goals, and probably a lot that came as a result of his work as well.
And I think, it's a fair question to say, or to ask to what extent does, Esteban, I guess, also deserves some credit for the improvement we've seen from Harrison Sawyer this year, because, I remember admitting to you as much on this podcast that, I became a bit of that, Shaq meme where he's like, I'm sorry, I was not familiar with your game.
Yeah.
And Harrison Sawyer has definitely, while having performed well in 2021 as well, he has added elements to his game. He has become a much more incorporative player, and by extension, a much further, a harder to deal with player. But I would probably, my biggest sort of letdown or biggest disappointment, what didn't go well, it wasn't just the lack of a plan B after Harrison Sawyer's departure. I think there's a case to be made that you could extrapolate that out to just a general not having much in the way of a plan B, even with Harrison Sawyer, because I think a lot of the game, extremely effective though it was, and I don't want to lose sight of what a good season South Melbourne did have, a lot of it was predicated around taking the lead and defending that lead. I mean, you look at over the course of the season, the amount of times South Melbourne actually conceded first in games was few and far between. But when they did, more often than not, they didn't get the win. I think there was only 2 times that they came back from behind, and that was against Avondale, who Avondale are, probably one of the most attacking outfits in the league. So the Avondale game and the Dandenong Thunder game, where they came back and got an equaliser right before halftime with a penalty. So while that A side of the South Melbourne record is effective in this league, sides have had a year and a half now to adjust that and improve and work out what they can do against it. And that raises the importance of a need for a plan B, which I think a lot of the times, with or without Harrison Sawyer, South didn't necessarily have. So I think that's the sort of big area of improvement, I think.
Player of the season, Lachie. I'm going with Sawyer. For me, was player of the season. Golden Boot was so important to the way that they played. If it's anyone else in terms of, I won't steal yours, but someone else in terms of who I think had a really good season, just very quietly, I think, was Pat Langler. I think and also Max Mikler. They're the two as well, just honourable mentions for their seasons as well. I would think that both of them potentially should be, if they aren't already, in the eye of potentially, or for Pat making a return to A-League circles and for Max Mikler to look to make the leap, because I think they're both certainly good enough. Yeah, well, again, Pat's a good example of a player who also has come into South and I think added another element to his game as well. Becoming a bit more of that kind of goal-scoring, attacking option that we've seen in bits at Hume, but not quite to the same level. The late penalty area entries, the threats from corners and all of that sort of stuff was new for him, I think. But for me, Harvey Lopez had a season in the net for South Melbourne as good as I can remember most keepers or any keeper having. I could name probably 3 or 4 games just off the top of my head where Harvey Lopez made incredible saves to keep South Melbourne in a game or to defend or to stop a goal from happening when South were trying to defend their lead, which, as we've said, was so important to the success that they had this season and the actual modus operandi of their football. I still think about the Green Gully game that they had earlier this season. Now, the result eludes me. I think it might actually have been a goalless draw. I think it actually was a goalless draw, but that game could so easily have just been a South Melbourne loss. But for some of the goalkeeping heroics of Harvey Lopez on that day, these just incredible double saves, the acrobatics, it was brilliant. And really the only game where he wasn't outstanding was the grand final, and for a lot of those goals there wasn't much he could do, but a lot of the other contests he was brilliant. Even when they were defending the lead against Gully when they won in the semi-final, he again came up with some very big saves as South battened down the hatches. And I just think that without a keeper having as good of a season as he did, South wouldn't have been able to achieve what they did. And also the reason I'm giving him the player of the season as well, my expectation for Sawyer was already reasonably pretty high. I know he's a good player. He had a solid season with Bentley, but not at this level. No. Not at this level. No way. And enough to make me surprised that the swap actually happened. He's blown me away this year, and I think I can completely understand why he was South's player of the season. So, game of the season for South Melbourne. Now, I think we were... Probably answer this one we were both on the same page for this one, and it's so... it's the game hard. Of the year. It's the game of the year. Of the season. South Melbourne coming back from 3-0 down to beat Avondale 4-3 back in May. What a game that was. What a win it was for South Melbourne. It was a real statement win as well. It was obviously, from memory, it was a anniversary game. No, there was some sort of... It was the Ange celebration. Ange celebration game. And obviously, to come back from 3-0 down and win 4-3, incredible. Just incredible. It's still their second best... comeback from a big deficit at Lakeside. It is unbelievable. In this season, it's unequivocal. It's no contest. Absolutely. Well, and there was a great crowd for that game as well. Yeah. And I think that's maybe something for South to target next year is what can we do to get more people? Because despite
the success this season, the crowds probably, I think it's fair to say, haven't been as good
they waned.
as you'd have expected for
waned,
South Melbourne to have this season.
Started with a bang in that Heidelberg game, but you expect that for the early season
And to be fair, there are some extenuating circumstances, particularly cold winter.
Yeah.
There were some redevelopments being
the Saturday nights at Lakeside.
There were seats that were cordoned off because of painting works and all that sort of stuff. But I do want to see more people take an interest in this
let's
side.
be real, right? Like just
taking
putting it
interest.
from a complete human standpoint here. Saturday nights at Lakeside, when it's in the middle of winter, coming the chill off the lake.
Yeah.
You have to make sure you got your layers on. If not, you are in for a tough night. That's why I think I'd love to see South Melbourne play more during the day. Because I think it'd be great to see Friday nights or Sunday afternoons or Saturday afternoons even. Go with the 3 p.m.
They've got to factor in obviously the women's team playing
of course,
as well.
But considering as well the under-21s play at Northcote, like you can kind of have a bit more freedom in that sense. Obviously, making sure the women aren't playing.
I would
at the
like
same
them
time.
to experiment with that kickoff time a bit more next season.
I think you can get more people in during the day at that point. Maybe in summer, early in the year, you can stick with the night kickoffs because, of course, you don't want it to be too hot.
Yeah, I mean, the Thursday game, the season opener was great.
Brilliant. Well, of course, in that game, Lachie, what the great thing is now, Google actually have, the proper sort of scoreboard.
Nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
I feel like we're
so just
becoming more
don't
legitimate
have to go on to Sports TG. But, of course, just looking back on it, I mean, Avondale up 3-0 in the first 13 minutes. And then Max Mickela's double, Alan Webb, Harry Sawyer scoring. Incredible
and Max Mickela's free kick goal as well.
Yeah.
To put them in the lead was a ripper.
Yeah. The burning question, Lachie. I feel like I should get a sting ready for this, and I'll get it for the next one. My burning question for them is I felt we spoke about Harry Sawyer, but how do they replace Harry Sawyer? And who do they get to replace Harry Sawyer for me is the big question. I think that's, I guess, the big thing because I don't see South Melbourne changing philosophy next season. I think a lot of it's going to be the same.
I mean, why would they?
Yeah. So for me, that's the one. For yourself?
I think it's very hard to argue with what you said because he was so fundamental and so critical to doing what they do. I don't... Yeah, it's not going to be easy. You can see the thing is, even bringing someone in with very similar Harrison Sawyer-like attributes is no guarantee that he will have the effect that he will replicate the success of Harrison Sawyer. But I'm curious to know what they're gonna do with that position on the field. Like I've said, I think Xander Guy might be someone who not quite the same physical profile. But definitely, a tall, intelligent striker who can hold up the ball. He might be someone who's an option, but yeah, that's a big question. I guess the only other sort of secondary question I would offer up is, does Javi Lopez replicate the season that he has? Does he build to another level? If not, I wonder what impact that will have.
Let's give him a grade, Lachie. I'm going A-. A for the season, winning the premiership by the amount that they did, but the minus, the blemish being that grand final loss.
We haven't really talked about the grand final loss, have we?
A-. We've spoken about it at length last week.
Yeah, we
don't need to flog a dead
for
horse.
our South Melbourne listeners, we've probably gone into enough detail about that grand final. I'm actually going to be more charitable than you. This is a rare moment on this podcast. I'm going to go for an A.
Okay, fair enough. Oh, we're both still giving them A's. I'm just giving them that notch down because of the grand final loss. It would have been an A. It would have been an A because for me, if they won it, it'd be an A+.
Yeah, no.
It's just the manner in how they lost, as we spoke about last week. Just shocking. Let's move on. Port Melbourne, a disappointing end to a very good season. We spoke about disappointing ends for both these two teams. Port Melbourne, an amazing year from a home and away standpoint, finishing in second. Surging up the table to make the finals for the first time. Just getting this stat up in front of me. I think it was the first time since 2018. Yeah, 2018 was the first time. Yep, first time since 2018 that they have made the finals. A great season, as we said, home and away standpoint, but from a finals standpoint, a disappointing end, not making the most of their home final against Oakleigh, falling 2-1. What did we like? This season, they were one of the teams to beat. They were so well balanced. Adam Pittick coached them brilliantly all year. I think what I really liked was, as I said, the balance of this team. They could score, they could defend, they knew how to control games. That, for me, just how well-rounded they were, I think is one thing I really, really liked about Port Melbourne this season.
I love the adaptability. I love the collective nature of this side. Like, it was not a side where there was a particular player. Well, they certainly have strong players across the park. There wasn't a particular player who was like, okay, he is
the weak point,
or he is the weak point, or he is the standout bona fide star of this side, without whom the rest of the team wouldn't
just very evenly balanced
function. Like, yes, George Mills had a really great season, but I think you wouldn't say that someone is like irreplaceable. Like, everyone was kind of working for one another, and that's what I liked. They did some really interesting things tactically. They're sort of hybrid, 4 at the back that could become a 3 and chop and change depending on what was needed. That sort of system and the complications of that system, the positional rotations, the work the midfielders have to do to make themselves a threat in the penalty box, that kind of high concept stuff can only work if you've got a team who are prepared to, okay, forgive me the footballing cliche here, but prepared to play for one another. Like, the attitude of this side, I think, was what really worked well for me, because it was what allowed them to play in the way in which they did, and more often than not, it was extremely effective, but also extremely exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you know, Adam Pittick has done a brilliant job this season after, you know, and they've always been thereabouts since they made the finals. I mean, 9th in 2019, they were close. They finished 6th in 2020 before the shutdown, 7th last year. They were on the precipice last year. They made the round 32 of the formerly FFA Cup last year as well.
There were green shoots for them. Like, I think there was always a clear sign watching Port play under Adam Pittick that there was like some complex ideas and thoughts about how we're going to play in possession, what kind of things we're going to do to try and break down an opponent. But the consistency and the delivery of it was never there, partially because of some learnings maybe he's had along the way, or because of the strength and depth of the squad, which I think it's at its peak now. This project has been building year on year. We finally saw it come to fruition this season. And the other thing I like about this season, what went well, is that they completely stunned a lot of people.
Absolutely.
There would have been many people who had them outside the top 6, and here they are finishing top 2, game away from a grand final.
For me, the thing that didn't work well, I mean, the semi-final.
Yeah, it's the
semi-final. They did everything to a T all year, but just crumbled up 1-0. And Oakleigh just showed their class. I think it honestly, we speak about burning question later, but you saw that they just got, when you look at on paper quality, and I spoke about it being very well balanced, on paper quality, that's where they lost that game, just having someone with that individual brilliance who can win a game by themselves. And that's what Oakleigh had with Joe Knowles. And unfortunately for Port Melbourne, they probably just lack 1 or 2 players who can just take a game by the scruff of the neck and really hurt teams. And I think that's where they fell off in that semi.
I guess I wonder whether a player like that would work for them. Like,
I get that.
But I see what you mean. Like, the lack of a kind of
a game changer and a real X factor, someone who's got that.
They've got those players, but not quite to the same level where there's like one clear kind of standout.
Not taking anything away from Chris Duggan, who has been brilliant.
I mean, he's hit 14 goals this season, 15 goals this season.
But he can't do it all by himself. You know, Luke Tavir had a great season as well. I mean, we spoke about George Mells. He had a great season defensively.
Jackson Courtney-Perkins definitely stood up in Chris Duggan's absence.
Yeah, absolutely. They had a lot of guys out there that could do it, but I feel like they're just 1 or 2 players short.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
You're right. There's not necessarily a dominant, maybe Mells, but I think it's got to be the semi-final, because Oakleigh were the walking wounded. No one really gave them much of a. I mean, they're Oakleigh, you never write them off, but no one really gave them a huge chance. Port Melbourne were definitively the favourites. They'd pipped Oakleigh to the post to the top 2. They were the fittest side in the comp. They were really the only team other than South who hadn't dealt with Australia Cup, hadn't lost their striker on the eve of the finals, didn't have any injuries pretty much throughout the season, which is stunning considering how physically demanding the football that they play is. They were the side that had the most going for them heading into this final series. And that game at JL Murphy against Oakleigh was theirs to win. They were probably the better side on the day. They did take the lead. And Nick, to put it into perspective, do you know how many times Port coughed up a lead to lose in the regular season?
How much?
One time.
And in the semi-final.
Happened only once. And the second time that it happened was in that semi-final, which may be an anomaly. But again, it kind of speaks to the point you make that, you know, Oakleigh, while not being at their best, while having injury concerns, had something that perhaps Port Melbourne didn't. So I think that semi-final will leave a sour taste on what was a otherwise brilliant season for them.
Player of the season for me, Chris Duggan. I know it's a bit of a controversial decision because George Mel's finished so high on the gold medal count, but I think Chris Duggan's form in front of goal is hard to look past.
Well, and he did have that injury layoff as well. So you kind of wonder, put all that suspension, you wonder...
Still having such a good season after that.
Exactly. You wonder what he would have managed and what kind of conversation we'd be having now if he didn't have those concerns.
What about you?
Port are a hard team to give a definitive number one just because of, as we've said,
give it to the whole team.
They're a collective team. I mean, I've been unsurprised. I think Josh Wilkins has been outstanding. I think he's been one of the really important last pieces of the puzzle. Luca Tavira, I think for his first season of top flight football, deserves a massive shout out for the year that he's had, chipping in with 7 goals from midfield. It's got to be Mel's though. I mean,
I get what you mean.
It's hard to turn your eyes away from a player who, again, it doesn't really, in terms of goals and assists stats from this season,
just
doesn't
controls things.
Stand out, but he's the person who makes them tick. Not in a star player kind of way, but he's the clear fulcrum. He makes everything sort of happen. So I think it's going to be him. But again, I think it's a team where, by virtue of the way they play, there's a lot of competitors.
Let's just give it to the entire Altona Magic team. Altona, far out, Port Melbourne. I've had a bit of a blank. So I was just reading you know why? Because I was just reading the season guide and I saw Ross Archibald's name and said former club Altona Magic, and I just had a brain fade.
I'll give it to Mel's.
Yeah,
honourable mention the rest of the team.
The burning question now, Lachie, I did promise a sting, and I do have one.
Wow.
So just hang tight. We'll get there.
It always...
I'm going to play slightly in the background. So what is the burning question for Port Melbourne going into this off-season? For me, can they take the next step from, a second place finish in the semi-final? Can they go that one step more?
This is not the music I was expecting.
It's all right. It's positive vibes here. Can they take that next step, and can they be in a grand final next season?
Are you clicking intentionally?
No,
that's just the music.
Just doing it.
Just the sub. Okay, just an accidental. What is my burning question for Port Melbourne? God, that's a great question. What is my burning question for Port Melbourne? Can they bring in, can they sustain this? Can they keep this up? When you are a team that play in the way that they do, all for one and one for all, if you do have an unfortunate bump in the road, I guess that's my burning question actually, because they went through this season, other than Chris Duggan's injury, which they did account for, if they end up making a run in the Australia Cup next year or something like that, and they get injury hit like a lot of their competitors were, how does that impact them?
Yeah.
What capacity have they got to sort of withstand that? So I guess that burning question for me is, can they get through next season unscathed? Or if they don't, how do they respond?
Yeah.
Because that's been the biggest test for a lot of their competitors this season. And I think some could make the argument that perhaps that's part of the reason they were able to leapfrog Oakleigh into top 2 in the first place.
I think we're almost running out of time. We'll give a quick rating. Port Melbourne, I'm going to give them an A this season.
An A? Yeah, I'm going to go with an A.
Yeah. We're almost out of time. Shall we leave Oakleigh and Green Gully for next week? Spread these out a bit more.
I think we could. We probably have enough time to at least get through Oakleigh. Maybe even a little bit more. But shall we just do Oakleigh for now?
Let's do Oakleigh. We'll apologise for Green Gully. We'll save Green Gully for off the top next week as well. So don't worry. If we don't get to Green Gully today, we'll make sure we save them for next week. But let's talk about the NPL Victoria champions, the Oakleigh Cannons. Finished in third. They were in the top 2 for basically the whole season, then were hit by the wave of injuries and the wave of fixtures that came at them. 13 games in 60 days to finish their entire campaign, including the Australia Cup, the Doherty Cup, the League, the finals. They were doing it all, but they withstood it. They were runners-up in the Doherty Cup. They finished third in the regular season. They won the NPL Victoria Championship, and they finished in the semi-finals of the Australia Cup. All in all, what to like about Oakleigh's season? What isn't there to like about Oakleigh's season? This was an incredible run, a team that defied all logic with all the injuries they had, all the players that they had through this run, and still found a way to succeed. And they won the grand final. It's their first top-tier trophy, I think, ever. Their first ever, I don't think they ever won the VPL.
No. They made grand finals.
But they never won it.
Finals.
So
no.
they got the...
It depends to what extent you count the 2021 NPL Victoria.
Yeah, and of course as well, they won the 2021 NPL Victoria Premiership. So, I mean,
How could you forget?
Yeah, they were...
Unless you're Avondale.
Yeah, and of course, it's an amazing year for them. They got it done. So, for what I liked, the resolve, the pure resolve of this team to stick together and keep finding a way to grind out results even when it looked so unlikely with all the injuries. And this isn't even this is not a tangible thing you can just grab onto and say, we were able to do this.
There's a certain je ne sais quoi to the Oakleigh's year.
Yes, absolutely. It was all intrinsic. It was all mentality to keep battling on when they had defensive injuries and attacking injuries. They were playing every third day. They were being battered towards the end of the NPL Victoria season. They could have easily folded at the end of that NPL Victoria season, gotten to the finals and gone.
There were teeters as well.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that the last 2 weeks, the last 2 rounds of the season, they lost
5.
They lost to St Albans and they lost to Hume back-to-back.
Yeah.
Going into a finals against the Heidelberg side they had lost to both times this year.
They lost the Doherty Cup final after leading by a goal. I mean, there were signs that this team was getting ready to put it bluntly, they were about to potentially burst the seams. But they defied all logic. So you know what? What a season.
Yeah.
What a season.
What did I like? Being entertained. That's what I liked. Oakleigh were far and away, not in a way they play football necessarily out and out, in the same way that I was really impressed with Port Melbourne tactically. But in terms of just delivering drama consistently, Oakleigh just no contest. It's not even close. South Melbourne and Avondale maybe is the best regular season game of the year. But if I think about my top 5, my top 6, I think Oakleigh would be involved in just about every one of them. If it was the top 5 craziest games, they would be involved in pretty much every one. There's 6-2 against Avondale, the 2-1 game against South Melbourne, the 3-2 against Heidelberg, which was a fantastic game, the 3-3 against Heidelberg, which they won on penalties, the come from behind in extra time against Port. They have just, and that's not even mentioning the Australia Cup, they have just delivered time and time and again, and any neutral watcher who's kept abreast of the NPL Victoria season Oakleigh will stick firmly in their mind in years to come.
What didn't we like? The injuries. I think it's something that Oakleigh can't control, but it's just the injuries. I would have loved to have seen this team at full pelt all year. Having Jacob Aliopoulos, having Hamish Miller, having Matt Thurtell. I mean, we spoke about him beforehand. He's technically on their list, but he's been out all season with what could be a career-ending injury. This team at full pelt is what I would have loved to have seen. But unfortunately, we weren't able to see this team at full pelt, and when they were, not for long. So I guess for me, that's the one. I wish that we could have seen this team at full pelt. The injuries were just such a sour note. Even though they kept finding a way to win games, I think it would have been great to see this team at full pelt for longer.
Yeah, I mean, because I don't want to agree with you. My thing, maybe just as a point of difference, yes, we saw the success of the integration of a young player in Anthony Pantazopoulos this season, and Oakleigh have got a very deep squad. It's a squad that's hard to crack. There's not a lot of substitutions. I think maybe the thing that didn't work quite as well is we maybe didn't get to see as much of those youth talents being given a chance to step up and shine. And now I understand why that is. Points are at a premium. It's an important season. You want to trust your experienced guys. Your squad is so good that you can afford to have second stringers who are first 11 quality come off the bench. But as much as we celebrate the success of Anthony Pantazopoulos this season as a brilliant young player who I think will kick on, let's not, dance around the fact that he was the exception and certainly not the rule. And I think for Oakleigh to sort of build a continued legacy and to account for times where they have injuries, that youth focus needs to maybe be a bit more of a priority.
Yeah.
But then they're not exactly alone in that as well.
I mean, to just, put them under the microscope in that is probably a bit unfair.
No,
but I get exactly
But
what you're
that's
saying,
what I would think I would like to see a bit more of. And I get it. We can't necessarily play these young guys because they haven't had that experience of playing in the big games and all that sort of thing. But then, other than leaving, how else do they get that experience? But again, like you said, Oakleigh not alone in that issue necessarily.
Player of the season. Ooh. I know yours is going to be different to mine, but I think just the fact of how important he was and, of course, where this has led him to, it's Joe Knowles for me.
He's literally the gold medalist. It's a pretty safe bet,
It's Joe Knowles. I think that's the boring selection in terms of just, it's a bit of a cop-out, but I think it is quite universal that he was the best player. Anyone else other than that? Joe Guest.
Yeah,
honorable mention to him.
Joe Guest was the media player of the year. I will put my hand up and say that he was the person I voted for
him as well.
He had a brilliant season. His season was as good as his gold medal season, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But obviously the referees didn't agree.
For honourable mentions as well, I want to shout out to Oliver Kubalay.
Yep.
Friend of the show. We can probably just say, sensational year for him.
Hello to Oscar if you're listening.
Oscar? It's Oliver.
Oscar. I nearly leaked my...
Yeah. Do you want to say yours then? Is it Oscar Dillon?
It's actually not Oscar Dillon.
Well, he also had a great season.
He did.
And one other player I want to share is different to yours as well, Matt Fashini. And, of course, we want to say happy retirement for Matt Fashini.
From playing, not from work. The work is very much still continuing, and that's why
retiring, I think, at least I think he can keep going for many years. But, of course, the age of 32, focusing on, what's next. And, he turns 32 in a few weeks. Apologies, Fish. Obviously, still not 32 just yet. But retiring in the best way possible after winning a NPL Victoria championship. He's been there and done it all in NPL and now can go on to the next chapter of his life. But just want to say a big congratulations to him and, best of luck in the future from all of us here, obviously, as well. Came on the show a few weeks ago. We thank you for his time.
Absolutely. I hope he's not a stranger to Victorian football.
No, I hope we still see him around.
What I will miss about Matt
Fashini
just as much as his on-field playing ability is his ability to work the crowds that he plays against.
He's a great heel.
Upcoming final series will just not be the same without Matt Fashini going out of his way to razz up away Heidelberg supporters and his former club South Melbourne, who he gave it to as well.
Yeah, what a way to go out, giving them the go to sleep in the grand final and everything.
To be fair, that the way that grand final happened, achieving championship success for the club that he did get his sort of first crack at football and his move to victory at. It's the perfect way to end.
Absolutely.
And with the night to South Melbourne fans. He signed off in exactly the way you would expect Matt Fashini to sign off, I think.
Well, it's a shame he didn't get his pre-season friendly or post-season friendly against Melbourne Victory on Sunday, maybe to bow out.
Well, is he going to? Because they're playing Western United tomorrow night.
I don't know.
Will Matt Fashini
maybe have to ask? May have to put a question out. Maybe.
Anyway, my player of the season, very left field pick, even though he was the Jimmy Rooney medalist in the grand final. It's Aaron Williams.
Yeah.
It's Aaron Williams, who I think has massively flown under the radar this season. Well, he wasn't always incredible, the standout, the leading light. He has had to hold this defence together alongside Matt Fashini. They're in the back four. They've been the only ones who have really consistently featured. But in the centre of defence, Aaron Williams has had to play with multiple different partners.
He's the only one
who's been consistently there. So he's been the one who, in the middle, has had to hold everything together, whether he's with Anthony Pantazopoulos, whether he's with Oscar Dillon, who got injured, whether he's with Jacob Eliopoulos, who got another ACL, whether he's with Oliver Kubalay, who had to drop in at times. You would have expected at any of those points for their defence to crumble, to go completely to shreds. But in terms of conceding a bunch of goals and having a massive anomaly, it never really did.
No.
It never really did. No. And I think a large part of the reason that happened or didn't happen was Aaron Williams. I think he's had a massively underrated season. And we were talking about it off air, Nick. If he didn't sustain what we believe to be a pretty serious knee injury in that game against MacArthur in the Australia Cup semi-final, he might have been someone who could have made a return to professional football. He really was that good this season. regardless of who he was with.
I think, honestly, if he didn't, as you said, I reckon that there could have been much worse options than him as sort of a last-minute kind of signing
I
signing.
I think he made the players around him better as well.
Absolutely.
Because Jacob Eliopoulos is the oldest of those three defensive options at 25. Oscar Dillon, 23. Anthony Pantazopoulos, 9.
And Aaron Williams is 29 in a few weeks.
Yeah, he's the experienced head, and so it's because of him that Oakleigh have had, and Matt Fascini to an extent, and they've had the season they've had. On Aaron Williams, there's that one game that stands out was against the 3-2 loss against Bentley on a Monday night, where it was him and Oliver Kubele playing at centre back, and Aaron Williams played through his skin, and they were up against it. I mean, Ajak Riak was just going ham, and Aaron Williams was holding it together with just. It was one of the best performances I've seen from a defender in NPL Victoria, despite the fact that they conceded 3 goals, and there was not much he could do about it. I mean, I don't know how many times Oliver Kubele played centre-back before, but they were just holding it together, the two of them, and they did so well. But Aaron Williams particularly, sensational that game. So we wish him all the best with his recovery. We hope we can see him at some point next season. I really hope we can, even though, I mean, given the time frame, it's probably a bit unlikely unless he makes, unless he avoided an ACL injury. We don't actually know for sure if he did or not, but he didn't pass the tests against MacArthur, so we hope that he's all good. Game of the season, Lachie. I mean, for me, I'm going to say the 2-1 win against... It's easy to go to the grand final, but for me, I'm going the 2-1 win against Port Melbourne. Coming from a goal behind on the road, Joe Knowles scoring those 2 goals to swing the trajectory back in their favour and coming away with the win just after playing that really emotional quarterfinal against Sydney FC, where, I mean, the focus could have easily gone to MacArthur, and they just played the week before that as well, 120 minutes against Heidelberg, and they defied, logic again, coming from behind and winning a game on the road. For me, that's their game of the season. Yeah, very, very fair shout. I think if you ask Chris Taylor, he would say the grand final, no questions asked, and fair enough. I'm going to say, I know technically it wasn't actually a win in open play. It was a penalty win. But the Heidelberg-Oakleigh game, not only being one of the best games of semi-professional, football, just football generally, professional football, anything that I've ever watched in person, that was the point at which my sort of doubt, like surely this all comes to an end for Oakleigh, was at my highest. Like that was the moment. And it was also simultaneously the moment where I was like, I cannot write this team off anymore. Anytime I think they're about to fall, I can't write them off. And that's why, while everyone was like, Port, they're going to win this semi, no problems, I was like, I cannot tip against Oakleigh. It is at this point impossible because of what they'd achieved prior. They'd won in the Australia Cup through extra time, but they lost back-to-back games in the league against St Albans and Hume, as we mentioned. They went down in that game against Heidelberg, a team who had done the double over them into the league. And yes, they crumbled with literally the last kick of the game, Sean Ellis magic. But they managed to come back. When they got level, they pulled ahead again. And yes, Sean Ellis broke their hearts momentarily. And then they were perfect in the shootout. That was just the game for me, where it was like, all the things that they've been trying to tell us, you cannot write us off. We will overcome these challenges. They all came together, and I was like, I'm buying what you're selling. Yeah, I agree. And the extra context this is Nick Feely played through a bloody torn hip. And made three penalty saves. It's ridiculous. Yeah. And I think if you talk about what my favourite thing about Oakleigh was this season, what went well, the entertainment value, them being the entertainers, well, that game was that in a nutshell. Yeah. It really was. It was such an amazing game. Genuinely, it was the point where it's like, I can't tip against you guys anymore. Yeah. Because I just cannot trust. I cannot trust my judgment when Oakleigh are playing anymore. It just can't happen. All right, looking ahead to next season, what is the burning question? I mean, it's let's get. Sorry, I'll let you play the music first. Okay, you've had your fun now. It's how do they replace Joe Knowles? It's the obvious question. It's the only. I mean, it's the only question. I'm going to one-up that in terms of just with replacing Joe Knowles. How do they replace Aaron Williams in the heart of defence next season? Because they have Oscar Dillon. What shape is Jacob Eliopoulos coming back in when is he going to come back? He got his ACL midway through the season, so we're not going to see him until at least a quarter of the way in. How many defensive reinforcements are we going to have to look at? And as well, again, as you mentioned,
who replaces Joe Knowles out in that flank, and who replaces Matt Fashini at right back.
Who replaces Matt Fashini? Obviously, Matt Thurtell had that knee injury, so they probably will want to bring in a striker.
Yeah, well, they brought in, obviously, Mario Barcia for a midfield option. They brought Ryan Lost in, who can play really anywhere, and I think that they'll probably keep him around next year. He barely played because he got injured himself.
I mean, not Barcia, but Lost is a good depth side.
Yeah, so I think there'll be some. I think Oakleigh will be quite busy. The word is that they have a few players on the way in already.
Yeah, I mean, we have caught wind of their potential replacement for Joe Knowles, and that would very much answer my. It would pour a lot of. It would pour fire extinguisher on my burning question. But even then, the follow up is just because you've replaced Joe Knowles doesn't mean your replacement has the same effect, hits the ground running in quite the same way. So it's a two-parter.
Yeah.
How do they replace Joe Knowles, and who they replace Joe Knowles? Maybe it's two players that they need to replace Joe Knowles.
Not even that, but they've got to get defenders in as well.
How does that work?
Yeah. And of course, Nick Feely, what sort of shape is he coming back in next season?
There's no guarantee of a double up whatsoever.
Is Luis Italiano going to stick around permanently? Like, what's the go?
No guarantee of a double up whatsoever.
They've got a very intriguing off-season. I reckon they're going to be quite busy, Oakleigh, this off-season. A grade, for me, A+. When you take into consideration everything, an A+.
Yeah, like I said, I can no longer argue against this team. They have made themselves inevitable, undoubtable this year.
Yeah, they've become undeniable. They're undeniable. They've just been unbelievable all season. So we do apologise to all listeners out there. We didn't get to Green Gully today, but
we will get to Green Gully
off
in
the
good
top
time
next week. Don't you worry. We'll be all over Green Gully next week. But it is time for us to say goodbye for another week here on the NPL Victoria pod. Again, as mentioned, we'll be going right through the off-season, bringing to you as much NPL content as possible, special guests along the way. We'll be keeping an eye on the coaching merry-go-round. And, of course, thank you to new Melbourne Knights head coach Ben Cahn for chatting to us a little bit earlier today. We're looking forward to seeing what Ben can do at Melbourne Knights next year. They're one of the teams as well to certainly keep an eye on this off-season. Again, we'll be all over that, and we'll be over more report cards next week. And on the agenda, we've got the rest of the top six: Green Gully, Bentley, Heidelberg. Get your questions in that you want us to answer as well. We'll be keeping an eye on the transfers and whatever else happens in all three tiers of NPL football, even in the state leagues. Anything exciting that comes across our desk, we'll be jumping on it. But Lachie, anything else you want to add before we head off?
No, just to say thanks as always for watching. And if you've got any questions about those, report cards, or you got any questions just for us to answer during the off season, please. Yeah. At FNR_radio, at Lachie Flanagan, at Nick _. That's where you can send your questions. You thought I was going to forget the underscore as well.
I thought you were.
I know, Nick.
There's more than just one Nick Debano out there, as I've learned.
You don't make a social media plug unless you know the handles. But any of those, if you've got any questions you want us to answer over the off season, please send them in those directions.
Mate, there are more than one Nick Debanos out there, and I learnt that a few months ago that unfortunately I don't have the handle. There's actually another account that I made. I've just searched, and I've searched Nick Debano when I was 17 years old, and I need to find a way to shut that account because there's a picture of me as 17. So don't go looking for that. But anyways, guys,
only one Lachie Flanagan for probably good for the rest of the world.
Time for us to say goodbye. We'll be back again next Tuesday. Nick Debano, Lachie Flanagan in studio. Miss any of it? Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get them. Just like, subscribe, get to it. We'll be back again next Tuesday for plenty more here on the NPL Victoria pod.